Welcome back to an Elder Scrolls lore video. So I was considering what video to make today, and I honestly was going to do a Witcher lore video today, but I decided I would shake things up a bit and do a bit of a different series. And on my previous video, I did get a comment asking me to cover this race, kind of, and I actually decided that it'd be quite a fun video to make. In today's video, all I want to do is simply discuss one aspect of this race, and that is how the Snow Elves became the Falmer. And I will discuss the lead up to this, and I will cover this race briefly, but I plan to do an actual race video on this race in the future. But for now, I want to discuss this event. So to answer the question posed to you in the title, for you to fully understand the impact of the Snow Elf race becoming the Falmer, it is best for me to explain what a Snow Elf actually is. So Snow Elves are a race of elves, that like most other species of elves, are descended from the Dwemer, and it's actually also thought that the Snow Elves culture is most similar to the culture of the Dwemer, at least compared to the other species of elves in the Elder Scrolls universe, such as say the dwemer or the Wood Elves. For example, the dwemer have their completely separate culture that is very different to the Dwemer culture, but they are still a race of elves, so the Snow Elves culture was very similar to their ancestors. The home of these elves was the snowy country known as Skyrim, and it is widely believed that their genetic deviations from the Dwemer stem from their prolonged exposure to this harsh wasteland. Because, as I'm sure you will know, for a species to survive, it must adapt. So being in this snowy climate has allowed natural selection to make these elves more tolerant to colder climates, hence their skin being white. So for those of you out there that don't know how natural selection occurs, it's effectively a certain member of a species is born with a genetic deformity, but that deformity actually turns out to allow that creature to survive more than its brethren, so it means that other creatures in that species are more likely to breed with it, and then their offspring are more likely to survive, and so on and so on and so on, and because of the power of the exponential curve, as I'm sure you'll all know, eventually all of that species just possess that trait, as it just helps them survive more. It just happens naturally, it's not like a conscious decision half the time. And that's what occurred with the Snow Elves. An important fact to note for later on is that the Snow Elves aren't the only race of elves to settle in Skyrim, as another splinter group of Dwemer decided to settle there as well. But much later on than the Snow Elves, they'd already established their sort of race, what they were doing in Skyrim, before these Dwemer had even got there, and these Dwemer that then settled in Skyrim later on became known as the dwemer. And unlike the Snow Elves, they did not settle on the surface, but instead opted to go underground. Anyway, moving on from that introduction, at their peak, the Snow Elves were said to have a culture and society that even rivaled the Dwemer, and the Dwemer are the High Elves. And the High Elves are the elves that remained in the Somerset Isles and are very close descendants of the Dwemer, and obviously are going to be more advanced because all the other subspecies of elves had to set up their civilizations while theirs was still continuing. Anyway, so that just gives you an idea that the Snow Elves had a very, very advanced society and culture. And the Snow Elves were also said to be very, very good at using the arcane arts. Anyway, all was going well for these elves until the first atmorans arrived. And the atmorans, for those of you that don't know, are the ancestors of the human races, like say Nords. However, I believe that they are not considered the ancestors of Redguards. Redguards are an entirely different race of humans. Originally, the Snow Elves lived in peace with this new race and even allowed them to settle their own settlements in Skyrim. However, this peaceful coexistence did not last long, due to an event known as the Night of Tears. And just before I get into the Night of Tears, I just want to mention that there is a lot of information as to how the atmorans became known as Nords today. It is generally thought that Nords are atmorans, but they changed their name as they wanted to be considered a separate people to those of Atmora. And of course, over time, they eventually became slightly genetically different anyway. So for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to refer to the humans as atmorans, but to avoid any confusion in the comments, I just want you to understand that the atmorans that moved to Skyrim can kind of be considered as Nords at this point. The event known as the Night of Tears was an event in which the Snow Elves attacked and destroyed the rapidly growing settlement of Sarthal. After this settlement was destroyed, some atmorans managed to escape, most notably Ysgramor and his two sons. They then fled back to Atmora and gathered an army known as the 500 Companions, and they made it their goal to drive the Snow Elves from Skyrim. And as a quick side note here, it's thought that the reason the Snow Elves attacked this settlement is due to the powerful magical artifact that was located under this settlement, and this is the artifact known as the Eye of Magnus. Because you see, the Snow Elves wanted to control the powerful artifact, whilst the Atmorans simply wanted to bury it beneath their growing settlement, so it would never be used by anyone. The Atmorans' reluctance to give the Snow Elves what they wanted resulted in this war of extermination, where both sides were intent to wipe out each other's races. Anyway, To continue with the story, the events that unfolded after Ysgramor gathered his 500 companions is known as the Return. The atmorans landed in Skyrim and waged a new war against the Snow Elves, and after years passed, the Snow Elves slowly began to lose against them. The Snow Elves as a race became scattered and broken. They had gained many defeats after facing Ysgramor and his companions, and they eventually had to retreat to the island of Solstheim. At this point, the Snow Elves were led by a Snow Elf known as the Snow Prince, and whilst on this isle, they took a final stand against the atmorans. And bear in mind, before they had their new leader known as the Snow Prince, they were ready to give up and they didn't really want to fight anymore, but the Snow Prince gave them newfound hope and encouraged them to do it. This final stand was known as the Battle of Mosring, and it would be known as the final battle of the war, as in this battle, the Snow Prince was defeated, as was the Snow Elf species as a whole. With this, the Snow Elves' military power was gone. The atmorans launched a genocidal campaign and killed the Snow Elves by the thousands. After this final defeat, the Snow Elves that remained decided to seek refuge with the dwemer in their underground cities and fortresses, because throughout all of this war, they had maintained an uneasy alliance with the dwemer, and considering that the Nords were now seeking to wipe them from history, they had nowhere else to turn. Quite surprisingly actually, the dwemer agreed to help the Snow Elves, but the price they demanded was high. They had to eat toxic plants in order to live underground. These plants came from the Blackreach, and the dwemer gladly fed it to their elven relatives. Their reason for giving them these plants, is at least what they told the Snow Elves, was that it would allow them to adjust to living underground. But of course, we find out that that was not the case. You see, the toxins within these plants gradually destroyed their eyesight, and after a few generations, they became completely blind. And this was when the dwemer forced them into slavery. Just as a side note, not all the Snow Elves had agreed to the dwemer's price, and some splinter groups had searched for alternate solutions. However, most of those splinter groups are now dead, or they eventually went back and accepted the dwemer's price. So due to this enslavement, their lack of eyesight, and the horrible way the dwemer treated them, this once proud race began to become twisted, blind creatures, and eventually became the degenerated race known as the Falmer. It is commonly believed that the dwemer intended for this to happen, and in fact tricked them into this blind, slave-like state, as I mentioned earlier, although a few reports do say that the Snow Elves knew full well what the dwemer planned, but faced with the extermination of their race, they had no alternative. After some time passed, the Falmer revolted against their masters, causing a war that lasted decades. This war was known as the War of the Crag. This war raged for some time, with seemingly no other race having knowledge of this war. So for example, all the Atmora, or as you might want to call them, Nords above them, had no idea this was happening under their feet. Eventually the Falmer went to face the dwemer in battle, but the dwemer didn't appear, as they had all mysteriously disappeared. And I'll tell you what happened to the dwemer in another video, as it's not really relevant for the Falmer. And that brings us right up to Skyrim, and as I'm sure most of you will know, the Falmer can be found in almost any of the abandoned Great Dwemer cities, or any of their strongholds. And of course in Skyrim, they are still a race of, to put it bluntly, monsters. So that's pretty much the full story of how Snow Elves, this proud elven race, became these monsters. And personally, this story has always been one of the most interesting stories in the Elder Scrolls universe, in my opinion, as I think it's such a cool idea to kind of take a race that is pure and just, you know, amazing, and turn it into monsters. And they did it in such a clever way as well. They had it that their fellow elves betrayed them after they'd been destroyed by humans. They pretty much had no allies throughout any of this. And honestly, I feel bad for them. Snow Elves were always my favourite race of elves in the Elder Scrolls universe, even though we only ever get to technically meet 2 in the Elder Scrolls games, but I always thought it was such a cool idea, and I feel like it'd be quite a cool and unique thing to be one in the games. And also, of course, I'm very interested to see what their culture was like beforehand. Anyway guys, I hope you've all enjoyed today's Elder Scrolls lore video. I hope you enjoy these Elder Scrolls lore videos. I love the Elder Scrolls as a series, it's really cool, so I enjoy doing these videos when I get the time, so I hope you've all enjoyed today's video anyway. If you want me to do more Elder Scrolls lore videos, be sure to click the like button, as it'll encourage me to continue making these. Obviously, I'll still do more Witcher lore than the Elder Scrolls lore, but if you click the like button, it just lets me know that you enjoy these as well. Also, if this is the first video you're finding on my channel, be sure to subscribe. I do Elder Scrolls lore videos every few weeks, and I do Witcher lore videos every few days, and I do Witcher playthroughs. I do an Oblivion playthrough every few days as well. So if you want to be in tune for all that, be sure to click the subscribe button, and I'll be happy to welcome you to the community. As always, be sure to go and follow my Twitter. I do updates on there whenever anything interesting happens, whenever there's anything relevant I need to tell you, or whenever a video comes out. So if you want to be in tune for all that on Twitter, be sure to go and follow me on there. Also, of course, be sure to follow me on Twitch. If I'm going to play games like, say, I don't know, World of Warcraft or the Elder Scrolls Online, I'll probably do it on there, as it's quite difficult to do that on YouTube, and I do want to try and get more into something like WoW, so I would be really interested in streaming that. So if you guys want me to stream that, be sure to comment down below that you'd be up for that. And also, of course, if you don't want to miss the stream when I do something like that, be sure to go and follow me on Twitch. And as always, to end today's video, a big thank you to the Patreon pledges. You guys are just amazing. It's very, very kind what you do. I appreciate every single one of you donating to this channel. It honestly helps out so much, and it's such a kind thing to do. If anybody watching right now wants to donate, if anybody wants to follow my Twitter, Twitch, wants to join the Discord, all the links are down in the description, so be sure to go and check there if you're interested in any of that. But yeah, guys, I hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have an awesome rest of the week.